good?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Okay, it looks like the test stream was started, but the council meeting stream is not, is showing as off air.
Oh, mine's showing it's on.
Okay, let me see if it's on now.
114, 19 regular. Yeah, mine's working.
Okay, it's good now. Yep.
We're good? All right. I call the regular council meeting of Norton City Council for Monday, January 14th to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Be seated. Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Mr. Gaynor?
Here.
Mr. McClone?
Here.
Mr. Carrot?
Here.
Mr. Towsley?
Here.
Ms. Whipke?
Here.
Mr. Pilat?
Here.
Mr. Kernan?
Here. Did we have any communications from the public?
We do not.
Okay. Committee of the Whole, reports from standing committees.
Yes, Mr. President, thank
Mr.
you.
Karen?
Under the introduction of OR1 2019, which is coming up in the next section, I want to point out an adjustment has been made to the Section 1 indicating the amount not to exceed $29,800, which is different from the original language. I believe that's the only change.
And that was the amount that we discussed in Committee of the Whole last week, I
Correct.
believe. Yeah.
Yes, it's just been added and corrected.
All right. Okay.
That's where we added the two pieces of,
Right.
onto the truck, the little hydraulic thing. And
Right, the original ordinance had no dollar limit. We always like to put dollar limits in anyhow. So this both add a dollar limit, which we like to do as a practice, and then had the correct amount, which was not necessarily reflected before.
Okay, very good. So that's not necessarily an amendment. It's because it's never had a reading yet.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
just wanted to note it for the public.
All right, very good. Thank you. Any further discussion, questions, anything for Committee of the Whole? Just so council members, in case you missed it, I had removed old and new business from the agenda, thinking that this would be the proper spot under Committee of the Whole to discuss any questions, concerns, or anything that council members had, since at this time it could be referred to a committee or there could be some further discussion regarding it. It was just a matter of trying to clean up the agenda a little bit in my estimation. So at this time, if anybody has any business to come before council, then I would ask council members to do that now. All right, hearing none then, we move on to the consideration of the minutes. Yes? Charlotte, are you? I'm sorry.
I think you want to acknowledge
Did
the
I miss
budget.
something? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I do acknowledge receipt of the December 2018 budget reports. Thank you.
welcome.
Consideration of the minutes. The minutes of the regular council meeting of December 10th, 2018. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, then they will be accepted as submitted. The minutes of the organizational meeting of January 7th, 2019. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, then they will be accepted as submitted. And the minutes of the committee work session of January 7th, 2019. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, they will be accepted as submitted. Are there any reports from from officers, boards, and commissions? Mr. Mayor?
I would just like to announce that over this past weekend, Frank LaRose had his inauguration swearing-in ceremony. I was invited to and was present at the ceremony on Saturday. It was a nice, well-attended event and was very nice as Secretary of State here in Summit County. So it was,
Thank you.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you. Mr. Markey?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. No public hearings. We'll move on to introduction of new legislation. Ordinance number 1, 2019. Mr. Karen.
Yes, I'd like to introduce ordinance number 1, 2019 for its first reading. Ask the clerk to read it, please.
An ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of an agreement with Senweld Corporation for the installation of a dump body and plow hitch and declaring an emergency.
I'd like to move to waive the second and third readings and bring to a vote tonight.
Okay.
I'll second.
Have a motion and second to waive the second and third readings. Is there any discussion regarding the waiver only? Would the
Mr.
clerk-
President,
I'm sorry. Yes, Mr.
just for
Counselor?
clarification, that from the administration, that's, as spoken last week, that is very necessary, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Any further discussion regarding waiver? Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Mr. Carratt,
Yes.
Mr. Pelot,
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor,
Yes.
Mr. McClone,
Yes.
Mr. Towesley,
Yes,
Ms. Whipke,
Yes.
Mr. Kernan.
Yes.
Okay, and I would like to move that we adopt ordinance 1, 2019.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance 1, 2019. Is there any discussion? Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Mr. Carratt,
Yes.
Mr. Pelot,
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor,
Yes.
Mr. McClone,
Yes.
Mr. Towesley,
yes,
Ms. Whipke,
Yes.
Mr. Kernan.
Yes. Ordinance 2, 2019. Ms. Whipke.
Thank you. I introduce ordinance 2, 2019, and I ask clerk to read it for the first reading, please.
An ordinance authorizing and directing the mayor to enter into contract with the Legal Defender's Office of Summit County, Ohio Incorporated, and declaring an emergency.
Is that for first reading only, Ms. Whipke?
No, we did not discuss this last week, but we really need to waive the second and third readings on the fact, due to the fact that it should have been in place January 1st. So we're a little behind. And although we don't use it very often, it would save us money in case a case did happen to come up involving an indigent person, and it sets our cost at $170 to $750 per case. So at this time, if I would like to make a motion to waive the second and third readings.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to waive the second and third readings of ordinance 2, 2019. Is there any discussion regarding waiver? Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Ms. Whipke,
Yes.
Mr. Pelot,
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor,
Yes.
Mr. McClone,
Yes.
Mr. Carratt,
Yes.
Mr. Towesley,
yes,
Mr. Kernan.
Yes.
Thank you. This time I move to adopt ordinance 2, 2019.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance 2, 2019. Is there any discussion? Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Ms. Whipke,
Yes.
Mr. Pelot,
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor,
Yes.
Mr. McClone,
Yes.
Mr. Carratt,
Yes.
Mr. Towesley,
yes,
Mr. Kernan.
Yes. Ordinance number 3, 2019. Ms. Whipke?
Thank you, Mr. President. This time I introduce ordinance 3, 2019, and I ask clerk to read it, please.
An ordinance authorizing the administrative officer to submit an application to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for a recreational trails program grant and declaring an emergency.
We had spoken last week about waiving the second and third readings on this. I'm sorry, Mr. Fowler isn't here tonight because I had asked him a couple questions earlier, but I was still a little bit, there was a couple more I needed to ask. Since the deadline isn't, maybe. can you-
February 1 deadline, isn't it?
Yeah, so we could go ahead
we and could have a
wait.
s- Yeah, I would say no waiving tonight. Just do a first read and give them an opportunity to answer questions
Great.
if you have any.
Right.
He
and-
did respond to an email, though. Did you get it?
I did see that.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to go over that, just so the public knows.
Yeah.
The actual cost that we're looking at for the whole thing is like $307,000 and $307,090. And as for phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, I would still like to know exactly what the split is on this, and I didn't get that information. And then we had, for the funding, we'd changed sources, so I'd like to know that. And also, I'd like to point out that this is actually just to apply for the grant, so that means we're not beholden to this even if we.
That's right.
When we pass
And I
it.
think the answer, Mr. Fowler can answer probably in more detail, but I think the answer to some of your questions depends on, we have to hit on some of these grant applications, and once we do that, then we'll know what the split's going to be, and so I think that's part of the issue. So, but I'll let him.
So once those grant applications are submitted and we have an answer, then we can make a decision whether or not we want to spend the money or not.
Correct. We'll come back to you.
Right.
Right.
And I thought he said he was trying to get something like an 80-20 or 90-10 split on that.
80/20, but he wanted to confirm that,
Yeah.
and we didn't get that far. So at this time, this is just a first reading for tonight.
Any further discussion regarding the ordinance? Do you have anything else, Ms. Whipke?
Nope, I'm done.
All right. Ordinance 2019.
Thank you, Mr. President. I introduce ordinance 4, 2019, and ask the clerk to read it, please.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 97-2018 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. I can explain this after we go for the waiving, right?
Okay, yeah.
At this time, I'd like to make the motion to waive the second and third readings.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to waive the second and third readings. Any discussion regarding waiver?
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. President. Carvo, the company that's been hired by ODOT to do our widening of Cleveland Masson Road, has raised the cost by 9.3%. We have used all the money that we had coming to us that would have been put in on this, which was either an 80-20 or 90-10 split through ODOT or AMATS. Not our money anyway. So it's went up like $400,000. It's been pointed out to us that we can't rebid due to the state law because it's under 10%. And even if we did, we would probably end up using the same amount, if not more. And we would also be under the 10% state law again. We've been looking at widening this road for probably close to 20 years. It was in our comprehensive plan in 2006. It was talked about before then. One thing or another has held us up. In my way of thinking, I don't think it does the city of Norton any good to try and stall this off, and that we need to move forward with getting this done as soon as possible.
Right. There's a motion and a second to waive the second and third readings. Any further discussion regarding waiver?
I guess what I'm asking on, Charlotte, it's going to go up 408K, right? Is that still a 90-10 split within 400?
No, it can't be, but we don't have the exact
Oh, it's
split.
We don't have the exact, yeah, so because we're responsible for some of the cost overruns because they've run out of funding based on the estimates.
It just goes, okay.
It goes into our side of it, so,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Ms. Whipke, I guess I'd like just further clarification why this is an emergency. Is it for the timing of the project? Or?
Yeah. So ODOT's already awarded the contract to Carvo, and we have our portion. We have to sign our portion of the construction contract and say we're responsible for the funds. In order to do that, we have to have the loan in place. So Mr. Messner can certify we have the funds on hand to perform the contract.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion?
One more. Did Mr. Fowler, did they have the meeting yet for the?
No,
Okay, it's coming
we're
up.
planning on, yeah.
Okay.
Anything further? Regarding, there was a motion and a second for waiver. Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor?
Yes.
Mr. McClone?
Yes.
Mr. Carratt?
Yes.
Mr. Towesley?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Thank you. This time I motion to adopt ordinance 4, 2019.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance 4, 2019. Is there any further discussion?
If people do the math and are looking at the figures here like I did, the original cost, the city's portion was like 2.7 million. But the total project was a lot more. So if you do the math and figure out 9.5% increase, it's not off the figures here. It was off the total project that increase was. So
That's right.
you'll see that they work out if you use the original costs of the entire project, not just this section.
Any further discussion? Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Mr. Gaynor?
Yes.
Mr. McClone?
Yes.
Mr. Carratt?
Yes.
Mr. Towesley?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Introduction of prior legislation, ordinance 105, 2018. Mr. Gaynor?
Yes, I'd like to offer ordinance 5-218. Ask the clerk to read it for its third reading, please.
An ordinance authorizing real property tax exemptions with respect to certain real property within the City of Norton Community Reinvestment Area for the purpose of encouraging economic development within that area, authorizing the administrative officer to execute and deliver a community reinvestment area tax abatement agreement with TRK Legacy Holdings LLC and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. I'd like to move to adopt that, please.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance 105, 2018. Is there any discussion?
Yes, Mr. President.
Ms. Whipke?
Thank you. Mr. Marco, we do have the paperwork signed from the city, or the schools now?
We have the authorizing resolution from the schools. We
And that's-
will get the agreement signed by both the property owner and the school district. School district's authorized to sign. And that, as I explained last week, that will all need to be submitted at the time that goes down to the state for the exemption application. So we don't have the signature page in hand, but we will have that in hand before we
But
apply.
we're good to go, just like gold.
Yes.
Okay.
What the revised code requires is that the school district approve the agreement and approve the exemption before we act, which they've done.
And am I wrong, or is this the fourth reading?
It was a fourth
I
reading.
think it's a fourth reading.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm done.
Any further discussion? Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Mr. Gaynor?
Yes.
Mr. Carratt?
Yes.
Mr. McClone?
Yes.
Mr. Towesley?
Yes.
Ms. Whipke?
Yes.
Mr. Pelot?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes. Are there any public service announcements? No further business come before council. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So
Make a
moved.
motion.
Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
Oh, gee, I wasted a page of my paper. Yeah, because I wrote